I think we lost Jose for a moment, so why don't we go ahead and move on over to Alan while we try to get Jose back in the Zoom link. So gotta love technology. So thank you all for your patience. So yeah, Alan, if you want to join, and feel free to introduce yourself and dive right in, and thanks for everyone's patience.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alan Jin. I'm an associate professor of economics at the University of San Diego. I've spoken at this event before, but it's been a while, so I'm glad to be back to talk about or to participate in this. And so I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to talk about the report that Dean King mentioned, and that was released today. And so this is the one on the, if I can get this thing going here. Let's see, get my slideshow going. Okay, oops, here we go. Okay, yeah, okay, so again, I'm going to talk about the report that was released this morning on the Cali-Baja regional economy, where we focus on production, employment, trade, and investment, okay? And so let me point out that, can't get the thing to advance here. Let's see what's going on. Okay, here we go, okay. So let me point out that we had a strong team working on this on both sides of the border. You see that you see the people who are involved here, and I'd like to acknowledge then all my colleagues who are involved in this project. Trigio Rivas, a student at USD, Melissa Flaca, myself, Ramon Sanchez from across the border, Pedro Romano, and my colleague at USD, David Shirk. Okay. And so I'm going to present a little bit of the findings that we had in terms of our study here. And it's summarized in this big figure then over here, okay? And so we're looking at the Cali-Baja regional economy. So what do you mean by Cali-Baja? Well, it's this binational region that straddles the 150-mile border between California and Baja, California. And on the US side, we have what is called the Southern Border Region, which is the counties of San Diego and Imperial. On the Mexican side, we have the 6 municipalities then in Baja, California. You see them over here: Ensenada, Mexicali, Rosarito, San Quentin, Tecate, and Tijuana, okay? And so this is a dynamic economy. There are 7 million people. If you look at the center here, we've got 7 million people in the region. We have an economy, a regional economy that's over $250 billion. And in fact, I think it's approaching $300 billion at this point. And then we have $70 billion then in cross-border trade. The approach we used was to use what's called the location quotient method. This is where we look at the industries that are overrepresented in terms of their employment compared to the national or overall proportions of people employed in those industries. So a high location quotient means that a region has many more people employed in that particular industry compared then to the nation, or in this case, the two nations as a whole. And so San Diego, the Cali-Baja regional economy then is a high location quotient region. As indicated here in the lower right-hand corner of this screen here, you see that in the industries that have a high location quotient, by that we mean they have 50% more people employed in them than the binational average. We have a total of 33,000 firms in the region, and they employed then over 650,000 people, and they represent 70 different industries and almost $40 billion then in value added. If we take a look then at the areas where we're particularly strong, if you take a look at this circular area just to the left here then of the center, you see that particularly strong are areas like medical devices, audio video equipment, and semiconductors. And In particular, I'd like to highlight the medical device industry that is indicated here on the far left. You see that there are 353 firms then in the industry, over 70,000 people employed in the industry. You see the breakdown in terms of the employment in three metropolitan or three cities then in the region, and a total then of $2.5 billion then in value added. A couple of other things to highlight. We have a bifurcated economy here in the sense that we have manufacturing to the south. Majority of the manufacturing then is in Mexico. And we have concentration of technology and research and development then on the US side of the border, primarily then in San Diego. And so that is attractive to investors. There is $1 billion in foreign direct investment coming in every year on the Mexico side of the border, as people pour in money then to take advantage then of that manufacturing capacity that they have then south of the border. As I mentioned in just a moment, we also attract a lot of money then to the San Diego side then as well. Other elements of the regional economy that we looked at include border crossings. There's a lot of movement of both goods and people across the border. Almost $70 billion of goods then cross the border. And you see that 44 billion came from Mexico to California, another 25 going then in the opposite direction from the US then to the Baja. And that's down from the pre-pandemic levels. Trucking had been impacted then as a result then of the pandemic. In addition to that, we have a lot of people then crossing the border for work. We found that 54,000 people live in Mexico, and they cross the border to work or go to school. They work or go to school in San Diego every day. And then we have some movement in the other direction as well. There are 4,700 people living in San Diego and Imperial counties, and they cross the border and work then in Mexico. Okay, so we have movement of both people and goods then in both directions. The region is preparing its workforce for the economy of the future. We have high enrollments, almost 50,000 students enrolled in higher education total. We have about 31,000 on the US side, and we have about 19,000 then on the Mexican side. And a large portion of those, 32% in the US and 38% then in Mexico, are those degrees then are in STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, and math. So this gives you an overview then as far as the regional economy is concerned. Let me turn to some other findings that we've had. And just can't seem to advance the page like I want here. So there we go. Okay. Yeah, okay, so let's go to some other findings here. I mentioned audio and video equipment manufacturing. That is the most highly concentrated industry that we have here. We're well above the binational average, but it has been declining. This study is an update of a study that was conducted in 2008. And so between 2008 and 2018, about 3,000 jobs were lost in that particular industry, and there's a $600 million drop in value added. The location quotient dropped from 28.8 to 24.1, which indicates that, again, that industry has less of a share of employment than it had previously. Now, note it's still high. That 24.1 means that the employment in audio and video equipment is 24 times higher than the binational average. So it's still a big concentration. It's still a big industry, but it is declining. As I mentioned, though, medical device manufacturing has been on the upswing. 31,000 jobs added between 2008 and 2018. And you see that its location quotient increased from 7.6 to 10.1. Okay. And then finally, in terms of these other findings, we found that the area is attractive to outside investors. As I mentioned, over $1 billion a year in FDI, foreign direct investment, on the Mexican side. On the US side, we've had a lot of venture capital flowing into San Diego. It's going in at a rate of $2 billion, more than $2 billion a quarter then. Just to give you some perspective, back in 2017, we had 1.7 billion for the entire year. So again, now we're getting over 4 times as much foreign direct investment. Mostly that money is going into the life sciences. You see the areas biotechnology, pharmaceuticals then, and genomics. And, let me talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19. Note that the first bullet says the region's strength in manufacturing technology has helped it weather the pandemic. Yes, we have some industries that have been particularly hard hit. If you take a look at the employment losses in the 2 months where we had severe job losses in 2020, you see that the first 2 sectors were particularly hard hit: arts, entertainment, and recreation, and accommodation and food services. You know, those involved audiences, those involved face-to-face contact with people, and those were among the hardest hit by the shutdowns that we saw starting in March of 2020. But if you take a look at some of the areas where San Diego has, or the Cali Baja region has strength in terms of its comparative advantage, you see then that the losses in those areas were less. Manufacturing only dropped 7%. Information, you see, dropped 8.4%. You see professional, scientific, and technical services then dropped by 5.9%. So they held up better. They held up better. A lot of those, for example, information and professional, scientific, and technical services allowed for remote work, like we're doing now. So they weren't as hard hit then by the pandemic. So while our tourism industry was hit severely as a result of the downturn, our strength in these other areas helped keep the local economy then afloat, and now the economy then is rebounding. Note that truck traffic at the border was initially impacted, but has since rebounded, as is illustrated then by these 2 charts here. You see then that exports by truck took a big dip. This bottom line here then is truck traffic in 2020. That's the dark blue line, and so it took a dip in April, but it's bounced back. And so in 2021 here now, we're well above that level, and we're above the level that we saw then in 2019, the last pre-pandemic year. And then also the same is true as far as imports. Coming in to California then. You see that we have the same pattern, a big dip as a result then of the pandemic, and then a rebound then as far as import traffic then is concerned. Okay, and so let me conclude then by just pointing out a few items here. Note that as a binational economy, we have a lot of synergy. Cali Baja is just more than the sum of its parts. So the 2 areas working together draw then a lot of synergies. We've got the manufacturing on the Mexican side. We've got tech and research then on the US side. And as a result of that, that gives us then a dynamic economy. In terms of a policy implication, we need improved infrastructure. A lot of work has been done as far as that's concerned, and we need more. We need more then in all areas: environmental, transportation, and so on. Third point here, investments in STEM will aid industries then on both sides of the border by enhancing productivity and innovation. One thing that we need to look out for in particular is what economists are calling the STEM divide, that the fact that STEM education is better among more affluent communities than areas that have lower income. And so because STEM is going to be so important in the future due to automation and increased technology, we need to ensure then that we get high quality STEM education at all levels. And then finally, government, business, and civic leaders need to make evidence-based decisions. there's a lot of political, there was a lot of political tension surrounding the border. There's also the issue then of tending to focus maybe on one side versus the other. We sometimes get into our own silos, but a lot of room and a lot of need then for cooperation then to get the regional economy then, to keep the regional economy then growing and dynamic as it is. And so, again, you can read a lot more about the details of our report. The whole report is available. I don't know how we're going to structure this, if people are going to ask questions right now, but thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'll turn it back over then to our moderator.
Thanks, Alan. Next, we have Jose Maria Barrero, who we introduced earlier. He's our keynote speaker. He's a professor of finance at ITAM in Mexico City and founder of the Work from Home Research Project. And a quick note, we'll handle the Q&A after the panel, and we'll invite all of our speakers back to answer questions. Jose?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Sorry about the little technological problem before. So actually, I can't share my screen because somebody else is still sharing. Great, thanks. Give me just 1 second. Great. I think you can probably all see that now, right? So again, thanks very much for having me. So as was stated before, I've been working with a group of other researchers at Stanford and at the University of Chicago on working from home. And so what I want to talk to you about today is how I see the working from home outlook in 2022 and beyond. So basically a little bit of background of where I'm coming from. So this WFH research project, which we've been running since May of 2020, and if you're more interested in this, I encourage you to go to wfhresearch.com and have a look at all of the material that we have there, including kind of media mentions, all of our research output, and some policy pieces that you might be interested in. Basically, what we've been doing is we've been running surveys of 5,000 Americans once a month, every month. And so currently, today, I was dealing with some little things with the January survey that is currently in the field. And this complements, so with my co-authors on this project, we also collaborate with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta on a survey of about 500 US firms per month. And basically, we're trying to figure out how the pandemic has shifted working arrangements and kind of whether working from home will stick, if so, in what form. And to give you an idea, so our research has had a lot of impact in the academic literature, but also in the business and finance press. So this morning, for example, in The Economist's well-noted free exchange column, the title is "Will Remote Work Stick After the Pandemic?" And it's based on a presentation that I gave last week to a group of academics at the American Economic Association annual meeting. So to give you an idea, kind of this is the sort of impact we're having, and this is where we're coming at the problem, basically with lots of survey data. So to give you an idea, what is the picture? So before the pandemic, based on government surveys, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics does what is called the American Time Use Survey every couple of years. So in 2017 and 2018, they had the American Time Use Survey, and from that data, we can estimate that something like 5% or 1 out of every 20 full paid working days in the US was a full day that was worked at home. Then we all know kind of the story. The pandemic arrives in March of 2020, and this number shoots up significantly. So in May of 2020, to give you an idea, something like over 60% of full paid working days were being provided from home. And since then, this has trickled down as infection levels have waned and shifted around, and people have made plans, given that the pandemic doesn't seem to be anywhere near ending. So if you look at kind of the second half of 2021 over here, between 40 and 45% of full paid working days have been provided from home, according to our data. And additionally, kind of we have questions in our survey that ask, workers, basically, how much is your employer planning for you to work from home in the future? And so here, based on the latest estimate that we have from the December survey wave, it's upwards of 25%. So it's more like 28%. So kind of more than 1 out of every 4 full paid working days is going to be provided from home after the pandemic ends. And as you can imagine, this skews heavily towards certain types of jobs. And so here's it's looking by education. What is the probability or the percent of workers given in a given education category who are working mostly from home? And this is based on data from the last 3 months of the survey, so October to December of 2021. And you can see, yeah, workers with a graduate degree have about 3 times as high a probability of being working from home than workers who have less than a high school degree. So kind of one of the stories that I want you to think about is yes, we're going to see more working from home, but this is not going to be an equally distributed working from home. And so certain jobs, certain occupations are going to do it much more often. And so I'm going to probably say a little bit more about this in the future, but to give you a preview, the kind of as we were hearing in the previous presentation, if there's a lot of manufacturing on the Mexican side of the San Diego-Tijuana border, and there's a lot more kind of knowledge-intensive jobs in San Diego, that means that we're probably going to see a lot more working from home for jobs that would have been located in San Diego. Okay, so yeah, I think, or let me go back for a second. Yeah, so somewhere between 25 and 30% of full paid working days will be provided from home after the pandemic. But in practice, how is this going to be organized? Is this going to be kind of full-time remote, full-time, some people kind of in a hybrid mode? What are those working arrangements going to look like? So with my co-authors, what we forecast is something like the following. So for the typical large organization that has, say, 100 or 200 employees, well, people who were working on site in 2021, probably because their jobs are specific to being done on site, they're probably going to still be working on site in mid-2022. And this you can think of as amounting to something like 50% of employees. So these are mostly people who don't have a college degree and who are kind of frontline employees, say in a manufacturing plant. They need to kind of physically do stuff in that plant, or they need to provide services in person. So for example, if you work in healthcare as a nurse or as a doctor and you need to see patients in person. There's going to be about 30% of employees, say professional managers, and these are mostly college graduates who are probably going to be in hybrid mode. So who are going to, say, spend 3 days in the office and 2 at home, or 3 days at home and 2 in the office. And these people have been mostly still fully remote in 2021, given kind of the amount of infection that we've been seeing in the past several months with Omicron, and before that with the Delta variant of COVID. And so yeah, I think if there's a lot of people who are still fully remote who are going to gradually transition by mid or late 2022 into hybrid. And then there's going to be a smaller category of people, some 20%, that are currently fully remote and that are going to stay fully remote. And so I think this is going to be mainly people who are in specialized roles that don't need kind of to do a lot of teamwork and collaboration. And typically, if you think of jobs that are kind of knowledge intensive, that only need a computer to be done, for example, but that can be done fairly independently from the rest of the organization, I think these are the typical sorts of jobs that can be done from home. And so my guess is in the San Diego Tijuana area, there's a lot of people who say can be based in Tijuana, and they can get a contract to do something for a US company, and it's going to be now kind of much more acceptable for them to do it kind of as an independent contractor from Tijuana, and maybe come in once or twice during a 2 or 3 month project for a business meeting. So I think this is how we're going to see the world. But yeah, a lot of people, especially a lot of people in kind of professional and managerial jobs are probably going to end up being in a remote, in a partially remote hybrid mode. And yeah, this is basically what we see in the survey data. So right now we're estimating based on recent surveys that about half of workers are going to be fully on site after the pandemic ends. And again, these are kind of mostly people who have to do their job on site. 30% or so are going to be hybrid, and about 15 to 20% are going to be full remote. So you have to be kind of in a job that really doesn't require a lot of in-person interaction in order to do the full remote. And you can see kind of where, so the figure on the right shows you based on your current, based on your post-COVID working arrangements, what are people doing now? And so for the most part, people who are going to be fully on site are already fully on site. People who are currently hybrid are going to probably be split are currently split between hybrid and full remote. So there's a lot of people who have already started doing hybrid, but there's a lot who will be hybrid and are still doing full remote, given kind of the concerns about social distancing that we still have. And then again, if you those that are going to be full remote in the future are probably already full remote now. So this is this big 77% of people who say that they will be full remote, they're already full remote. And so this is very much in accordance to the predictions. Now, hybrid, as I said, is going to be kind of a huge part of working arrangements in the future. And so if you think about it, it's going to be twice as important as full remote. And here are some of the reasons why I think that is. So working in the office is particularly good for creativity and for firm culture. Kind of, it's hard to develop a firm culture if you never see your colleagues in person, or it's hard to kind of go through and find solutions to important big problems if you don't see your colleagues in person. It's much easier to do those sorts of interactions in person than remotely. And so those are the benefits of working in the office, but there are also kind of important benefits to working from home. So on one hand, it's quiet. So I know offices can be very busy, and so hopefully as schools in the US reopen, for example, it won't be an issue for parents to spend a couple of days at home in a quiet environment with fewer interruptions than you might have in an office, especially an office with an open plan. And the other thing is this saves on a commute, and I think this is going to be highly important for, again, the San Diego Tijuana region, given that so many people need to cross the binational border in the morning and then cross it back in the afternoon. So I think there's a lot of gains there to save on commuting time, which is basically time that you can't devote to your personal life or devote to your job because you have to be standing in line waiting to cross the border. So those are kind of some of the key benefits of both modes, and hybrid kind of can give you the best of both worlds. And I think if you look at the business press, a lot of large organizations around the world are implementing hybrid precisely because they want to balance kind of or get the best of both worlds from working in the office and working from home. So here's Citigroup, and their new CEO, Jane Fraser, announced in early 2021 that they were planning for mostly a hybrid workforce. If you go and hear what Google is saying, they're saying basically the same thing. And same thing for Amazon. Maybe kind of relative to where we were in, say, the first half of 2021, I think is that because the pandemic has extended itself with the recent Delta and Omicron waves of infection, kind of the return to the office has been delayed. So my view on what's happening is that people are getting kind of more accustomed to remote working. And so that means that hybrid days are going to be a bigger share of the total in the future than what they would have been if we had returned to the office earlier, say before the summer or around Labor Day in 2021. Kind of another reason why I think hybrid is and remote work in general is going to be a big part of future working arrangements is the following, and it's that it's going to be hard for companies to retain and attract talent if they don't offer it. And so given that kind of all these big companies that are arguably good places to work at and that have tons of perks are offering it, it's going to be hard for other companies not to do so. And so to give you an idea how we get at this question in our survey data by asking workers, basically, what would you do? How would you react if your employer announced that you and your coworkers all need to return to the office a full work week, 5 days a week, starting month after next. So basically in the January survey that is in the field now, we're asking them a hypothetical. What if you were asked to return to full-time in-person work on March 1st? And you see kind of consistently, there's a large share of employees who say, look, I would just go back. That's the way life is. But something like 40%, so consistently say they would either return, but start looking for a job that allows them to work from home, or about 7%, 6 to 7% consistently say, I would just quit on the spot. You're not going to force me to go back 5 days a week. And so we see this consistently. We see that this is also particularly the case for women and for minorities. And so in particular, if you want to attract diverse talent, it's going to be super important to offer remote work. Yeah, so if all firms are going hybrid, so I've made it sound like this is kind of the perfect sweet spot solution. I don't want to fully give you that impression because I think there are some important challenges with hybrid work. And so for example, there's should we let employees choose which days they come in or not, and how many days they come in or not? And I'm going to argue that this can be a dangerous proposition. But first of all, kind of why is this an issue to begin with? There's huge variation in how much employees want to work from home. And so this is a big argument in favor of letting them choose. And so this is based on a survey question that we've been asking consistently for lots of months that reads, in 2022 and later. We've recently changed the wording to say after the pandemic ends, because 2022 is here and the pandemic has not ended. But anyway, how often would you like to have paid work days at home? And so these are people's preferences. And you see, this is basically the worst thing you could get if you're a manager, because the two most popular options are basically, I never want to work from home, or I want to work from home full time. And you see the kind of, there's huge variation across what people want. So yeah, this is an argument for letting people choose. But we, my co-authors, and I have become concerned about that proposition for many reasons. And so let me go through some of them. And by the way, kind of, I think that the press has picked up on some of our criticisms. So Nicholas Bloom here is kind of my star co-author who was in the media all the time talking about working from home. And so you see he's put a lot of thought into this question. And so let me share what he and I and our third co-author have to say about this. So there's three concerns. The first is that if you let everybody choose which days you come into the office or not, you can very easily end up with mixed mode, which is, imagine you're sitting in this conference room on the left where half of the people are there and half of the people are on Zoom. And basically, these two photos here make it look like it works seamlessly, but in practice, it doesn't really work, right? So kind of the people who are on Zoom can feel left out. Basically, if there's only one person in the group who is not there, then basically everybody has to be on Zoom. And so you might end up having meetings where everybody, or most of the people who are in the meeting are in the office, but they're all in their individual cubicle on Zoom, on headphones. And so kind of that totally defeats the purpose from going to the office. So this is kind of one reason why it's not a great, letting people choose is not a good idea. Secondly, there's different preferences for when people want to come into the office or not. Basically, if you let people choose which days they want to come into the office, well, they would rather stay home on Mondays and Fridays and come in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I think a lot of us can relate to why this is. You want to have kind of a longer-ish relaxing weekend, kind of staying at home and not having to commute to the office on a Friday. But what this means is that if you're an employer, you're not going to be using your space efficiently because you need to have enough desks for everybody on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then kind of have an empty office basically on Monday and Friday. So this is probably not a great solution. This is another reason why letting people choose which days they are hybrid is not a great solution. Sorry, I was just checking the Q&A for a second, but we can handle that later. The third reason is, and this is related to a point that I said before, is letting people choose can be kind of a diversity time bomb, because who wants to work from home is not random. So this top figure on the top left here compares kind of how much men and women want to work from home, and specifically focusing on men and women with college degrees who are typically people and children who are typically kind of the people who would have the option to work from home. So, and it turns out women want to work from home full time significantly more than men. Men want to do it part of the week significantly more often. Okay, same if we look across racial and ethnic groups. So how much do workers want to work from home? It turns out that Black, Asian, and Hispanic or Latino workers want to do so more than non-Hispanic whites. And so why is this an issue? Well, it turns out, and this is based on the academic research, so one of them by my co-author, one paper by my co-author Nick Bloom, and a different paper by Natalia Emanuel and Emma Harrington, they basically show that when workers work from home, they tend to get promoted less often, possibly because they get less face time with their manager. And so if we let people choose when to work from home, and it turns out that women with children and racial and ethnic minorities are exactly the people who stay home, and then these are exactly the people who don't get promoted, that is a diversity time bomb for many organizations. So this is kind of yet another reason why letting workers choose can lead to kind of unintended negative consequences. So what do we see in the survey data? Basically, so I told you I work on two surveys. The first, what I've been talking about so far is mostly coming from our survey of 5,000 workers on a monthly basis. This picture here is coming from our monthly survey of 500 firms across the US. We've been asking them basically, how are you going to organize hybrid work when there is hybrid work? And you see, for large organizations, typically how they organize this is at the team level. For smaller organizations, there tends to be a little bit more company-determined common schedules or company-determined varying schedules, say kind of by division or by broader team. But so what I want to say is look, I think firms are thinking very carefully about how to organize hybrid work, and kind of it's no surprise that when you look at kind of the biggest, the most prominent firms in the U.S., a lot of them are basically telling entire teams or entire divisions when their workers should come into the office, or maybe not telling them, but coordinating at the level of the team or at the level of the division when people come in and when they stay home. Because so kind of our perspective is that is kind of the best way to get hybrid to work most efficiently. Now, there's another issue for hybrid that I want to mention, which is that managing a hybrid workforce can potentially be much harder than managing a workforce that is 100% in the office or that is 100% remote. And so to talk about this, let me go back to this anecdote from Yahoo about 10 years ago, where Marissa Mayer at some point was letting teams of people at Yahoo work from home. And they later got a ton of bad coverage because they had to cancel this. So kind of they were letting people work from home, and then kind of one day they woke up and said, you know what, we're not going to allow you to do this anymore. This is not working. And so that kind of gave work from home or remote work a bad rap at the time. But the reason why this happened was that they realized that they were not managing their remote employees appropriately. So employees can be managed in two ways, if you think about this. We can manage them on output. So basically on, are they achieving what they need to achieve? Are they getting their work done on time and kind of with the high quality that we expect from them? Or you can manage them based on inputs, based on whether you see whether they're working. And so what does this have to do with the Yahoo story? Yahoo did not have at the time kind of the greatest practices for evaluating people on outputs. They could only evaluate them if they knew that they were sitting in their chair working. Okay, and so the reason why they had to cancel their work from home scheme is because they realized that all the people who were working from home were basically slacking off all the time. And so why am I bringing this up now? Because now that we're going to move to a world where a lot of firms are going to be hybrid and a lot of employees are going and even kind of 20% of employees are going to be fully remote, we really need to think about evaluating people on outputs. Because if we evaluate them on inputs, it is never going to work, right? Because it's very easy to evaluate someone on inputs if you can see them sitting at their desk 5 days a week. If they're remote, you can't. And so kind of the danger here is that firms that don't have good managerial practices and HR practices that evaluate people on outputs are basically going to have to cancel their hybrid schemes and not get any of the benefits of hybrid, simply because they're evaluating, they don't have a way to evaluating their employees except if they see them in their chair from 9 to 5. Okay, and kind of in 2022, kind of the scary remote version is maybe the only way that you can do this is by installing kind of surveillance software on your employees, which I mean I think is a little bit of an issue and possibly not kind of the optimal decision. It's much better to organize your employees and ask them to kind of to do their or evaluate them based on the quality and the quantity of the work that they accomplish. I think this is also an issue for the San Diego Tijuana region, in particular because kind of the quality of managerial practices is much higher in richer countries. And so in particular, it's much higher in the US than in Mexico. So this is based on a survey of managerial practices among manufacturing firms that my co-author and other collaborators did a few years ago. And you see kind of the US has the best managerial practices in manufacturing in the world, and Mexico comes significantly below down the list. And even though kind of it's above, for example, lots of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere in Latin America. And so I'm a little bit worried that basically firms on the San Diego side of the border are going to be able to have the managerial quality and the managerial practices that are enable working from home more so than those on the Mexican side. And I think more broadly in the Mexican economy, I've heard some anecdotes of firms that despite having mostly knowledge workers, they've asked them to come back into the office. And I think it's because kind of not just the managerial practices, but the culture is very kind of suited to you're a good employee if you're sitting at your desk from 9 to 5, or if you're in Mexico City, more from like 9 to 7 p.m., which is a little bit horrible if you ask me. But anyway, and so this is a danger, and I think it's something that's going to come up in the next year or so. Finally, I already mentioned this, but I think, so the shift to remote working is a benefit for workers. So workers seem to value it and they want to do it, but who's going to get that perk is basically very unevenly distributed. So what this figure shows is for different levels of earnings, the black circles are showing how much employees who belong to that earnings level want to work from home, and the red triangles are showing how much their employer is planning for them to work from home. And you can see basically there's a little bit of a slope when we look at what workers want. So higher income workers tend to want to work from home a little bit more. But where you see kind of the big difference is in how much these high income workers who are in more than $200,000 a year are going to work from home a lot, whereas workers who earn $20,000 to $30,000 a year are going to work from home much less. And so here's, again, this is one potential pitfall of the shift to working from home is this is going to create, in essence, a new dimension of inequality that didn't used to exist. And I guess we've been living with it for some time now during the pandemic, but in the future, once we don't all have to be remote because infection levels will be down, I think this is going to become more salient. Yeah, finally, I have maybe one or two more slides, and I hope I'm not running over time. But something else to think about is that the way we organize offices in the post-pandemic world, where there's a lot of hybrid work, is something that's going to need a rethink. So in particular, we're going to have more Zoom rooms, meeting rooms, and lounge seating in offices, basically things that enable communication and collaboration rather than kind of the old style offices that had lots of individual space for kind of individual work. So kind of, again, in the best case for hybrid is is going to come when organizations select which days their teams come into the office, and they use those days for collaboration, communication, for solving problems collectively, and then they leave them to do their individual work at home on the days that they're going to have kind of this quiet space at home to work, not bring them in order for them to sit in an office kind of by themselves, not talking to anybody. So to summarize, kind of here are some key things about management decisions. I think for a lot of organizations, hybrid, so 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, or vice versa, is going to work very well. So for new hires who need to be kind of onboarded into the organization, who need to learn the culture, it makes sense for them to come in a little bit more often and stay in their first year. But basically by hybrid, we get the best of both worlds, in particular kind of for the San Diego Tijuana region, a lot of savings in commuting time and time waiting to cross the border. In terms of choice, with my co-authors, we think that deciding when to come into the office at the team or say at the division level is going to work much better than to basically make this the Wild West where everybody decides which day they come in. It's going to be critical to invest in HR performance management, because otherwise, basically, you're not going to be able to do hybrid work successfully. And once you realize that you can't do hybrid work successfully because you can't evaluate your employees when they on the work that they're doing while they're remote, you're going to cancel the hybrid scheme, and that's going, and so you're not going to get any of the benefits from it. There's concerns about inequality. Offices are probably going to need some reconfiguration and rethinking to enable collaborative design rather than individual work at the workplace. And I want to stress that I think this is game changing for cross-border business, because think if you live in Tijuana and you work in San Diego, and now instead of having to commute Monday through Friday, you can commute 1 day or 2 days a week and kind of save all that time waiting in line to cross the border back and forth. That is going to be game changing for the efficiency of businesses in the area. And so the last thing I can say is look, for businesses that are implementing this, I would encourage you to experiment, evaluate how well things are working, collect data on how well things are working, and kind of react when things are not working. So let me leave it there. If you want further information on this, again, I encourage you to go to wfhresearch.com, which is kind of our research center where we have policy, data, media mentions about all that we've been working on, and where you'll hopefully find a lot more resources if you're interested in this topic.
Thanks so much, Jose. This was a really enlightening talk and very timely. I think a lot of us are wondering what the future holds in terms of work styles. So thank you. Next, we have an outstanding panel to discuss border issues. I'll be moderating the panel, so I might as well introduce myself. I'm Daniel Ennemark. I'm the senior economist at the San Diego Workforce Partnership. And our panelists are Kenia Zamarripa, Executive Director of International Business Affairs at the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, Carlos Jaramillo, President of the Tijuana EDC, Pedro Montejo Peterson, the President of Index Zona Costa, and Gustavo Lopez, Senior Associate at Policy Link. So let's jump right into it. We've heard a couple perspectives on how the border is central to our economy, but I'd like to ask each of you, from your own perch, from your own personal perspective, how do you see the economy, how do you see the border being central to our economy? What portion of the economy is connected to the border in some way, but particularly from your viewpoint, how do you see the border as being central to the economy? And feel free to jump in.
Ladies first, Kenia.
Of course, thank you. I think we can't really talk about our region's economy without mentioning the border and the cross-border dynamic, as you say. Our economic ties include all of our economic engines, from tourism to the auto sector, medical devices, And I'm sure we'll dive in a little bit about each of them. But San Diego and Baja are home to the largest medical device cluster in the world, though we're now shifting to a concept of life sciences as each of our sectors evolves and continues to grow. We are home to a 2.5 billion integrated manufacturing supply chain. We see components moving back and forward across the border several times before the final product is ready to be sold to the customer. And it is thanks to trade agreements such as USMCA that the average US household also saves about $10,000 per year. So even if you're not directly working in any of these industries, we all benefit from trade. We all benefit from the cross-border region and our economic ties with Baja. I often also say that we're united by the border, we're not divided by it. And I think this just applies to everything in the border region. We need both of our communities, both of our governments to work together to strengthen each of those economic, cultural, and diplomatic ties so we can all benefit from them.
If I may jump in, I think there's two perspectives in the question, the US perspective or the San Diego perspective and the Tijuana perspective. If we look at it from the Tijuana standpoint, obviously the border is totally central. The spillover effect from the economy, from people working at factories or in the service industry or in the medical tourism industry, restaurants, everything, a lot of the economy is related to the border. In the San Diego perspective, it changes. I think it's not 100% central. And I think that also has a lot to do with the policy making regarding the border, in how sensitive is the US side versus the Mexico side related to border policies. Now, the other aspect related to the border has to do with that San Diego and Tijuana, we are the only border where the US city is larger than the Mexican city. If we go all the border, if you go to Calexico and Mexicali, Juarez, El Paso, Laredo, you will see that always the Mexican side, the city in the Mexican side, the economy is larger than the US city. This is the only border crossing where the US city economy is larger than the Mexican city economy. So the dynamics that we have in our border are totally different and unique to the other border crossings. So also we need to divide and separate what's going on in our Tijuana, San Diego border versus what's going on in other borders between Mexico and the US. So also we have to take that in perspective.
Can I go, Gustavo? Good morning to everybody. Yeah, I'm agree with Carlos, and basically we need to understand we have in Baja 1,100 maquiladoras. There's 4,000 trucks crossing every day the border between Tijuana and San Diego, and we get and we have 400,000 employees just in this industry. So yeah, it's you know, so important. Basically, we don't know. In Tijuana, we talk about what percentage of the economy that this means, and some people say 30-40%. Our feeling is that it's a lot more than that, because basically what we went through in 2020 with the pandemic, we saw when the industry was closed, or the non-essential industry was closed, we saw the impact. We can feel that it's even more than 35 or 40% what the industry means in this region.
What's the state of the border? For people who may not be keeping up with it quite as much, you know, briefly, how have capacity and restrictions changed over the last 10 years? Are they related to politics? Is it related to COVID? Yeah.
If I may, again, I think the border is often politicized. Decisions are being made by people a long flight away from us. Each of those decisions impacts our border communities. The chamber and other stakeholders, such as the Tijuana IDC and Index, are constantly reaching out to local, state, and federal government leaders precisely to educate them on the border dynamic, our contribution to the national economy, why we matter to them, the opportunities that we can take together, the challenges that we face all across the southern border. For many years, I think we've had sort of like a reactive approach. We have been tackling and addressing inhibitors and other challenges, but many of them continue to this day in 2022, right? Border wait times, you mentioned that. We overcome restrictions, but then we have those border wait times increasing 5, 6, 7 hours, right? So again, even though we were successful in advocating for businesses to reopen in 2020, as Pedro mentioned, and then starting our economic recovery, the border region was still left behind because we had the travel restrictions, which impacted us for 20 months. And then from day one, here we are, the border communities and the private sector urging the administration to lift restrictions and focus on the same health protocols that had already helped us reopen businesses and also reopen air travel. So in a way, it was a little bit sort of like a discrimination feeling, like why are we having such an issue just walking across when others can just simply fly into the States. So that, I think, is just one example when we can see that politics were getting in the way of simply letting us be as a border region. And
you mentioned politics real quickly. I think a lot of people might have a conception that a Republican administration means a more closed border. A Democratic administration means a more open border. Is that fair, or is that a simplification? Is there more nuance there?
I think it's more of an oversimplification. That's certainly the case we've seen recently, but I wouldn't say it's black or white. You know, it's more of like a foggy area that we're struggling to navigate as administrations come and go. And it's us here in the private sector that are the only constant. So we're the ones pushing for those policies, for those initiatives and projects to move forward, not only for the border region, but again, highlighting our contribution to national economy on both sides of the border.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gustavo. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think to just highlight Kenya's point, I think, Daniel, you asked if across administrations, some of these policies are more favorable to the border or less favorable. And I think one way that to exemplify this is that the Trump administration placed many border restrictions and also a lot of very politicized restrictions on asylum and migration that have many effects on the border and affect us all more broadly. But some of these were rescinded by the Biden administration. Many of these have held. One policy, Title 42, which was was placed upon health reasons, which expelled asylum seekers from reaching the border and preventing them from seeking asylum to prevent the spread of COVID-19. These restrictions have not been lifted. These restrictions have continued to be used by the Biden administration. So I think there's a lot of nuance. And this goes beyond just immigration policy, but also trade and other policy that continues from administration to administration.
And
go ahead.
Sorry, agree on what Gustavo and Kenya are saying. For me, the border is in a critical stage. Border waits are ridiculous. We're seeing last year, we were having trucks waiting for 4 hours to cross. Now went down to 2.5. You have a lot of workers, U.S. citizens that are working in the U.S. spending 4 hours to cross the border every morning. So it's in a critical stage. They're understaffed. The border crossings are understaffed. So instead of having 20 open gates, you have 5, 7 gates open, and it's just choking the economy. We have to understand that the border chokes the economy. If we would have a more efficient border crossing, we will be talking the numbers that were presented about the size of our economy. If we just reduce the border waits, we would be adding more economy into our region. It's that simple.
Yeah. How might the state of the border change in the foreseeable future? I know, Otay Mesa East is one of the things that would factor into that. Anybody have a perspective on that?
Well, let me talk about that. We have a projection coming into in the next 2 or 3 years. When I was talking about 4,000 trucks a day, that can grow to 6,200. So if we don't do something about infrastructure, we're going to have a big problem. And we need to add, all the challenges that we have at this point. We also have, we're missing, let's say, 100,000 drivers in Mexico. So that's another thing on these delays that Carlos is talking about. And I think it's 200,000 drivers in the US. So one thing leads to the other, so it's very, very important that we invest in infrastructure. Same with OTAI 2, as we call it in Mexico. We are going to have, it's so necessary at this point. I know infrastructure and some investment, it's been made in the US, but not yet in Mexico. And that's one of our priorities at this point with the industry.
What role do businesses play in shaping the border? What voice do they have in terms of advocating for border policy and addressing wait times and all that?
I think I briefly touched on this. We are the only constant in the private sector. We see administrations come and go. All of us here are part of this coalition of binational stakeholders that are really helping shape the border. As you just said, the chamber, for our part, leads delegation trips to Mexico City, Sacramento, and DC, so we can help advance these projects, policy that our border region, our community, and our businesses need to thrive. COVID permit, we will be going to DC March 27th to the 30th, and border infrastructure, wait times, as well as seeking those economic opportunities for our border region will be an essential part of our agenda. And of course, other issues such as the Tijuana River Valley and just sort of like everything that impacts our border community. That is yet again, just one more opportunity for us to collaborate. And I think here in San Diego and Baja, we are really a role model of what the US and Mexico relationship can be. But certainly, just to go back to your question, what is your role there? It's just, we need to keep engaging and be the ones really leading and spearheading those changes.
The Mexico experience is policymaking, same as the US, but policymaking is made in Mexico City. And sometimes the struggle in Mexico is that we are just one border. We're just one. We have to sensibilize the uniqueness, again, of the Tijuana-San Diego border crossings and the border area and the regional integrity, which is much different to other borders. So I keep on bringing this topic because at the end, we're totally different. The dynamics of the economy are totally different. And the growth that we're having, it's impressive. As Pedro was saying, just to give you some numbers, our industrial space, our highest year of industrial space absorption was 2019. It was 3.6 million square feet. This year, we are at 7.8 million, only in a year. We grew 220% from our highest year in industrial space. And that is related to what Pedro is saying in terms of trucking services and truckers and employees. So imagine how much are we inputting to the economy and the pressure that this is creating at the border. So even so, with all these issues, the economies continue to grow, and they're expanding at a higher rate that they were expanding pre-COVID. So we have a post-COVID economy versus a pre-COVID, and for industrial has been very positive in what we're seeing.
That's great. When we talk about the economy, I think it's always important to remember what we're talking about as human beings and their actual subjective experience. Money can help people dramatically, but ultimately what we really care about is people's overall welfare. And I'm curious about what are the kind of human rights and non-economic welfare implications of these border delays and restrictions? How is this affecting people who live in the region?
I think we have already briefly also touched on that, but we're talking about people spending, 5-6 hour one way, plus the hiccup of coming back. Thousands of students pre-pandemic, obviously, and workers crossing the border daily, still even during the pandemic. And that how detrimental for their health or the quality of life or our mental health is to just spend that much time just stuck at the border. And not only because of just sitting down and commuting back and forth, but because of those emissions of the cars and trucks just being idle. I don't think we talk about that too often. We have communities, residential areas, schools that are just adjacent to the border region, which are directly impacted. And that obviously has also an impact on our community as well.
Yeah, I think, and Kenya touched on this earlier as well, that a lot of these delays, a lot of these restrictions, some of the which were placed as a response to the pandemic, others which, have built up over time over infrastructure that just needs severe updating, really do impact people. From the Jobs Without Borders report, 54,000 people crossing from Tijuana to San Diego daily to work. This means, especially now with, at the height of the pandemic, with some of these restrictions where wait times were over 6-7 hours, people getting up at 3 a.m. or earlier to arrive to the border to be able to cross to get to San Diego in time. Many people who were our essential frontline workers here in Tijuana. So these delays have very severe indirect impacts. And I think it's also important to highlight that it is disproportionate. I think people during the pandemic restrictions were allowed to fly in. So you could fly from Mexico City to San Diego. But crossing through a land border was very much restricted. And so some of those cases, and I think it's important to also remember that these inequities do impact people who rely on work crossing the border. I think one really awful example was in August of 2020 during a heat wave. There were reduced number of ports of crossings open. So the CBP had a policy of deterrence to try to limit people from crossing back and forth for non-essential travel. And I think we might remember the story of an 89-year-old woman who unfortunately died as she was waiting over 7-8 hours in 100-degree heat in the border. So these wait times have direct impact on people.
So final question for everyone here. If you were going to advise the audience on what we all can do to address the border, to advance the binational economy through addressing the border, do you have any advice? I mean, there's a lot of business leaders and education leaders and nonprofits and a lot of powerful folks on this call, and I'm just curious about what advice you'd have for all of us in terms of what we can do, how we can be engaged in this.
Well, if I can start, communication. We need to keep this communication, what we're doing right now, and we need to work together. We need to understand, the border. I'm talking about, industry and crossing. Like, we are 6,000 maquiladoras in Mexico. From there, it's maybe 80% are U.S. companies, and we're part of 60% of the total exports from Mexico to the U.S. So that's important. We are basically all these delays affect all the trade flows, both directions. So I think that's the important, and I'm pretty sure, Kenya, when you go to DC and everything, that's basically the point. So I think governmental and non-governmental organisms all together, we just need to keep pushing, until we have better results.
I would, again, several ideas. One is we need in San Diego to talk about more about the border. There has to be more sensitivity in the San Diego side towards what's going on the border, so we can have more representatives, governmental representatives working on this topic, also on the Mexican side. And we need to have one voice, one agenda. We are working on one agenda. Kenya, I'm sure that she can talk a little bit more about it. We are currently working on a cross-border coalition where we have one agenda with different topics, basic to centralize and have this one voice. So we have to engage. We have to engage with Mexico City and Washington, D.C. and keep on pushing policy making, staffing, infrastructure, so we can make our border crossings better.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, just taking action, even if it's as a resident providing public comment and increasing our civic engagement, participating in conversations such as this one, just listening in and sharing what we heard and having those discussions, and taking a proactive approach. I mean, start investing time and resources on the projects and initiatives that will help strengthen our shared economy, our life quality as a border region, but really taking action, right? Not leaving it at having a conversation, but really spending, again, time, resources, participating, going to DC, going to Mexico City. Most of the time, people are like us, the Chamber Index in Tijuana, DC, we're already doing something, and we need everyone's help so that we can strengthen that voice.
Yeah, and not much more that I can add, but I think it is really important that the people who live in the border who are impacted by all these policies and highlight, our experiences of people who live here, policymaking being made thousands of miles away. These data points can be reduced to such a degree. So exactly that, advocating by communities who are directly impacted.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate your expertise and your perspective. We're going to spend the last few minutes of the call answering questions from the audience, and we'll invite Alan and Jose to join us again for this segment. The first question that I think is going to be of broad interest is, how is the Great Resignation, so-called, negatively affecting the binational economy? I think last month we had the highest number of quits recorded in recent history, and just interested in any perspectives on how that's affecting the binational economy. I know in the panel, the number of truck drivers was brought up. Any other perspectives on the Great Resignation? Alan?
I'll go ahead with that. It does have some impact. You mentioned truck drivers. In the US, I don't know what the numbers are on the Mexican side, but the turnover rate among truck drivers is 87%. So that is just contributing to the shortage of truck drivers and the disruptions then in the supply chain. But if you look at the industries that have the highest quit rates, restaurants and hospitality, number one. I don't know if the latest numbers have come up, but in November, 6.8% of workers in that industry quit. Second is retail at 4.4%. So our tourism industry here in San Diego is being impacted by that. I talked to one hotel owner who said, forget about a $15 minimum wage. He's got to pay $20 an hour, and his minimum criteria is that the person's breathing.
Wow. So a quick question unless anybody else has a perspective on this, and feel free to jump in. Jose, I'm wondering, actually, Ron Davison asked, is there any data suggesting the pandemic will lower the number of days worked? Is there any movement toward a 4-day week? Has any of that come up in the data you've looked?
Yeah, so I don't think I have any hard data on that question. But my guess is that it's going to go hand in hand with this idea that we have more hybrid work, and especially if employees start to get evaluated more on their outputs, what they accomplish, and the quality of what they accomplish rather than on their inputs, because it means that if say Fridays tend to be one of the days of the week that you stay at home, and you accomplish everything you need to do at 10 a.m. or at noon on Friday, then it should be fine for you to take that afternoon easy, or maybe say drive that Friday morning to somewhere for the weekend and kind of answer a few emails and finish off what you need to do without really kind of being connected that entire, say, Friday. I think we're going to see a movement there, but I'm not aware of any hard data on this matter.
Any perspectives on those of you who work with businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, the EDC, and all that?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, although it's really out of the region, I mean, we're hearing from, Iceland and other countries are really testing it out. And it's going to be also a matter of seeing what they do and how other businesses abroad also share their best practices. I think it was also Panasonic that was developing an optional 4-day week. And those are going to be the cases they're going to have to follow closely to see and really get hard data and whether that's feasible or inefficient even.
Another quick question, is there any specific legislation or policy that is being considered right now that relates to our binational economy that you'd recommend people read up on or understand or advocate for?
A lot of it has to do with just border infrastructure. I think I briefly answered that in the chat, but continuous investment in border infrastructure. We heard both Carlos and Pedro also talk about that and how we can, spend all the resources we want and get USMCA and really help our businesses grow and export abroad. But then if we cannot keep up with that commercial growth, then we'll be stuck here exactly where we are. And that's where we have to keep planning ahead and take that proactive approach. I mean, we have OTAI 2 coming up in 2024, but we are already struggling with staff at our current ports of entry. We don't even have them all open there. We have Pet West closed on the further notice for the migrant camp situation. And then, so what can we do? Start asking for that funding and start asking to secure those, the creation of those additional jobs so we can, once we get the infrastructure that we need, we can have them be up and running and be efficient.
And also, Daniel, just we must not forget the environmental part. Also, obviously, our biggest, let's say, policy document is the UMCA. A lot of the cross-border has to do with the USMCA, and the USMCA has a chapter in environmental, and there's a budget assigned to the border, even to the Tijuana River remediation project that is going on. So also we have to put in place the issue about the environmental impact besides the economic impacts that the border has.
Well, I think we're at time. I just want to thank you all so much for your participation. And I really want to highlight two things that I saw in this economic roundtable that I really appreciate. The first is a real humility about predicting the future, which is hard won. I know the first economic roundtable I attended was 2018 or 2019, and we were told there's a recession coming, a business cycle-led recession. That business cycle-led recession never happened. And then the next one, someone said, oh, we're just not going to see any recessions at all for any reason anytime soon. And that was January 2020. So, when we predict the future, it's a dangerous enterprise. And I appreciate the humility on that. And then the second thing, and I think the most important thing for me, is hearing perspectives on how different the experience of the economy is for different people in the economy, and the environmental justice aspect of the border, for example. How are people near the border affected by the environmental impacts of it? The fact that you can fly into the United States, but you can't cross the border by land means that people who are rich enough to be able to afford to fly in can do whatever they want. And understanding that when we say the economy is great or the economy is bad, really the question is, how is the economy doing for who? And I really appreciate the perspectives we've had today. And I can't thank you all enough. And thanks everyone in the audience for joining us and for your great questions, and look forward to next time.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.